Okay, so for today's session, we will be covering the topic of personal security for travelers. After the presentation, we will have a brief Q&A. So if you had any questions regarding the personal security that weren't answered during the presentation, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat box, and we will address those questions during the Q&A session. And just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Please be mindful of your background if your camera is on. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box below so we can answer them during the Q&A session. And also, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you can refer to the Zoom support webpage, or you can also phone in. You can find that phone number in the Zoom registration link that was sent out to you when you first registered. And let us go ahead and begin. To see who all is joining us today, as always, I'm going to launch a poll. And this poll is asking, how do you identify? Are you student, faculty, staff, alumni, parent, or other? I'm going to give us just a few more seconds to answer. Maybe 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, and I'm going to end the poll. So today it looks like we have pretty much all staff. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here with us. And as a small introduction for myself, my name is Angelica Gilbo. I'm the program coordinator for the Office of International Safety and Security, and also today's moderator. Also with us today are our presenters. We have Aaron Rash, who is the Director of Office of International Safety and Security. And we also have with us Andy Altizer, the Director of the Office of Emergency Management here at KSU. And I will now turn it over to Aaron.
Thank you so much, Angelica, for that introduction. And thank you so much for everyone for joining us as we finish up. We have just one more session in our summer series. So I appreciate those of you who are logging in again. And for those first time, welcome. And also very pleased today to have Andy Altizer with us. So I am the Director of the Office of International Safety and Security here at Kennesaw State University, where I've been serving since October of 2019, so fairly new to this role, and it has been quite the year, so learning a lot, and I'm very thankful to have some great colleagues, such as Andy, with me to sort of help me along the way, and with that, I will turn it over to Andy.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to follow up with Aaron, I too work at Kennesaw State University. I've been here for 5.5 years now. The last 6 months have been the longest with the COVID thing. Before that, I worked at Georgia Tech in the exact same position, and before that, I worked at Georgia Emergency Management in their Homeland Security Division. So this is one of these topics. It's interesting and glad to take some kind of discussion. I will say that I've had the opportunity to travel abroad several times, and that kind of helps. Maybe not nearly as much as some of you, and definitely not Aaron, but I've had the privilege of going to fun places like Italy a couple times, and various other places in Europe, including Germany. I've been to China twice, once to adopt a little girl who is now 18 years old. And we took her back for her 10-year anniversary, and China had drastically changed. And then I've had some other places I've been, thanks to the Army after 9/11, like Afghanistan and Kuwait and Oman. That definitely was a whole different type of security operation. But between all those experiences, hopefully I'm not too radical with my ideas, but you can ask me anything in my opinion, and I may do the same with you.
Well, great. So today, as previously mentioned, we're going to focus this session on our personal security while traveling and how to stay safe while we are abroad. And again, if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to use that chat box, and we'll try and attempt to answer those questions during our Q&A session at the end. Moving on, some of this is going to be a little bit repetitive for those of you who are in our last session. Sorry about that, but some of the topics and things do overlap somewhat, so we're going to repeat them for those who are new to our presentation series. So generally we categorize risk in many different ways. There's 1,000 different combinations that you can sort of put things into. So I sort of delineated between our criminal threats, which are security threats primarily, accidents and illnesses, which we've covered, as well as natural disasters, which are safety, and somewhat health and security concerns as well that we've covered previously. But today we're going to focus really on that criminal element and what we can do to stay safe while we're traveling abroad. So on the screen, you're going to see some fun little sort of categories of risk, what we perceive to be the highest risk when we go overseas. So the big headline items that really grab our attention, like terrorism and natural disasters and armed conflicts. But there's this wonderful proverb I always refer to, because we focused on the snake, we missed the scorpion. So if we're paying so much attention to some of these less likely to occur things, not to discount them entirely, they are very much still real threats, but we can't spend all of our time focusing on the black swans and not also paying attention to the things that are more common, more likely to occur based on statistics and probability. So while we definitely do want to be prepared for things like terrorist incidents, especially in the past, couple of years, we have seen some pretty high profile locations, some locations where we frequently send students or where we frequently travel ourselves, become the targets, the soft targets to some of these attacks. We also want to be mindful of the little things, the everyday things that we can do to improve our chances of being secure and traveling successfully and safely while we're overseas. So how can we handle our own personal security and take control of that? So that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on today. So last time I did focus a lot on the Department of State travel advisory system that was implemented in January of 2018, and we went through how to really interpret them to understand the nuance in those travel advisories. And today I want to focus on OSAC, which is the Overseas Security Advisory Council. And that is another part of the Department of State. It is the public-private partnership, and they have a fantastic series of resources for travelers. Some of them are limited in who can access them. You might have to be a constituent, which means that you are a member of an organization that does have an affiliation and account with the OSAC group. But there are some resources that are available for anyone who's interested. You can create an account and subscribe to their newsletter, which has wonderful daily digests that give you news headlines from around the world. They also will update you when they have new infographics that they put together, or some reports that they do make available to anyone, regardless of their constituency level. And then there's also something called the Crime and Safety Report. And this is put out once per year for each of the major cities across the country. Generally, it'll be the capital city, but there are a few countries where they may have 2 or 3 different crime and safety reports. And this provides a lot more information on trends that have been experienced in the past year in a given location. It could be the number of reports that the local embassy or consulate has received related to, petty theft in a given location, carjackings. It really gives you a much better sense of what the actual on the ground situation is, what the trends are, what things are being reported that you may not quite pick up on to that extent when reading the travel advisories put out by the Department of State. And these are fairly easy to access. You can just go to Google and type in, China, OSAC, CSR, Crime and Safety Report, and that'll take you to it. It's available, for anyone to access. Again, it's updated about once a year. So I do encourage travelers to look at that whenever they have a chance. Some additional resources as well. Again, I'm not going to talk about the insurance or the On-Call International or the other countries' embassies and other countries, you know, foreign governments for their websites, so you can refer to previous presentations for that. But I did want to point out a few websites that I do like, just because I find them to have some good additional context and information. So one is Diversity Abroad. They have fun little destination guides, easily accessible for travelers. You can just send them to a student if they're going someplace and say, here's another perspective, especially if they have any concerns about, you know, their gender and identity primarily, or accommodations abroad. And also Equaldex, which it is crowdsourced. So I do want to add that caveat. It's not like a vetted, you know, government database that we're putting out there and making available. But it does have a good starting point to get an idea of what the norms are in a location. So if you do have travelers, or if you yourself have concerns about gender and identity issues when you're traveling to a location, it will give you sort of a quick overview of what you can expect and maybe what some of the legalities are or are not, and what the protections are or are not in a given location. Also, the Department of Justice, that has some good information about resources that are available to U.S. citizens traveling abroad, as well as if you are going to be engaging and conducting any business overseas while you're traveling, there's good information to know about things like bribery and corruption and gift giving and things of that nature. Most travelers don't really need to know those nuances, but you know, if you're traveling, if you're a high-level traveler, maybe that might be something you want to be familiar with if you're perhaps a part of the C-suite, or maybe advising someone who is C-suite. They might want to look at that information. Okay. And again, the emergency action plan sounds pretty scary, but it's really just a good idea before you go to really quickly think about, how am I going to get in touch with people? Do I have everyone's numbers? Do I have the local 911 numbers? Keeping in mind that there may be different numbers for the police, the medical services, and the fire services in a given location. Do I have my local embassy or consulate contact information? And then if I get separated, where am I going to go? What if I cannot get back to my hotel or accommodations? Do I have a plan B, a meeting spot that is somewhere a bit further away from that location, just in case that gets caught up in a security perimeter, maybe a few blocks away, that is someplace I would be comfortable staying for, you know, a couple hours if I needed to sort of lay low, hunker down someplace? Is it perhaps a coffee shop, or maybe an American hotel chain? Again, someplace that wouldn't be too, you know, opposed to an American citizen coming in, or a couple of citizens coming in and just sort of sitting down for a few hours just to wait things out. Also, if you're traveling for KSU, please be advised to have the CISI insurance information, as well as you can contact the KSU 24/7 International Emergency Line. It's the 6666 number. And as Andy mentioned in our last presentation, the Live Safe app also does have overseas capability. So that's another great resource in case you do need some assistance and need to connect to someone back in the States to help you in a situation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy.
All right. I forgot this video was in there. Did someone can start that video, or is that something I could do? All right, watch this real quick. It takes about 30 seconds.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? Go! The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
All right. I don't think I could make this too interactive, but I saw the moonwalking bear this time for the first time in a long time. I remember the first time I saw this video, I couldn't find that moonwalking bear. But the overall intent of this is to kind of know your surroundings and then know what's not normal. And that's just not people. It's usually behavior. And it goes back to one of the first slides at the criminal element. It's just learn what's abnormal. We spend a lot of time in special events like at football games, picking out what's abnormal before we decide whether there's something we should be concerned with. And the same way with travel too. It's a little bit more difficult when you're in an international environment, what's normal. I remember just like you probably, sometimes it's easy to let your guard down. I think I'm somewhere in the middle between being an extreme, and a naysayer. When I deal with myself, hopefully I'm a little bit balanced, but when it's, my daughter went to Italy with a high school group, and I was extreme with her, telling her all the things she had to do and to be careful for, and she just constantly rolled her eyes as I talked. I remember having a young man come up to me, and I was, just, I guess, upset that my parking cost like $12, and let my guard down, and thinking $12 for parking. And then I parked and went around the corner, and the real parking attendant got me. Said that'd be whatever, $8-10. So I was taken. And I take pride in knowing my environment and being ready for about anything. So because of the initial shock factor, I completely didn't know my environment. My situational awareness went way down, and I was a victim of petty crime. Now the interesting part about that for me, and the funny part about that for you, that was in downtown Atlanta. That was me going to the Fox Theater. So you always kind of have to be on guard and expect the unexpected, and don't get taken. So next slide, please. We talked about most of that. Knowing your threats, what's dangerous. That's doing your homework before you go. Part of my job is to do that daily. If in fact you can't see, but I got a coat rack. I don't even know if coat racks are used anymore. And if you saw what's on my coat rack, you would know that I constantly have stuff that deals with my kind of job here. I'm not a police officer, but I have a Kevlar helmet there. I have a ballistic vest it's got plates in it that could stop a rifle for the active shooter threat. I have a gas mask on there for a civil unrest threat if I have to get involved in that. And I've got chest seals and first aid kits, but what's new on there, if you could see it? I've got face masks, 3 different kinds, and a face shield that's on there now in case I have to walk out and have to deal with something like that. So you always got to constantly reevaluate what your threat and risk are. And that's the same with, depending on what country you're going to as well. And hopefully, if you're planning on any international travel, those are all relatively safe countries. And I would reiterate at the beginning of the slide, I think you have more of a chance to be a victim of theft than just about anything when you travel abroad, just like if you go to downtown Atlanta or Chattanooga or Savannah, wherever you're going. Trusting your instincts or your gut, using common sense is still the best way to mitigate against any of those threats. And again, no one's going to, I'm convinced no one's going to be a better security person for you than yourself. Next slide, please. Again, we talked about all those. Just theft, petty, and it's just not petty theft too. I think being a victim of violence should be a concern to everyone. We've seen a lot of that in the before the COVID threat in some of these countries where you go to the beach and go to an inclusive place, and there's been some sexual assault, increased sexual assault in those areas. We have to be concerned with that. And right now, I can't imagine any threat higher, although we're having more of a problem here than anywhere, of any kind of health-related threat as well. This would be a great conversation to have for the people, potential international students and visitors coming from a different country over to here on what measures they should take. Next slide. That's just about anything we do. We talk about the active shooter threat a lot. If they don't have the ability to do it and the training to do it and the will to do it, they're not going to be able to do it. Same thing with just a good old-fashioned regular threat as well. If you've ever had your car broken into, which I've had the privilege of that happen to me 3 times, you'll never forget it. And even though I didn't deserve it any of the 3 times, I sure didn't help matters by giving someone such an opportunity. My car was broken into at Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Columbia, Missouri, and right here in downtown Atlanta. And each time you thought I would have learned, I gave a pretty good opportunity by leaving things in my car. Once I changed in my car before I went for a run, and the person watching me thought that I would obviously leave a wallet in my car if I'm changing in the car, and then I'm going to go out and run in shorts and t-shirts. So give them that ability. Sure, if they have the desire, they're going to pick the weak link. In each of these cases, I was the weak link, and they got away with it. Next slide. Again, common sense. Don't have everything with you at once. The safety in numbers works well. It doesn't always work. When I worked at Georgia Tech, we had armed robberies a little bit too regular, including sometimes with 4 or 5 people. The interesting thing with one of the armed robberies that had at Tech, where there were 5 or 6 students walking, is that when they were approached, they knew something again wasn't right. The environment wasn't right. And in each case, they discounted what was getting ready to happen until the person pulled out a gun. I'm big about giving them what they want when it's a property theft. There's no reason for anyone to risk your life. We talked about 15, 20 years ago, you're always afraid of going somewhere, especially on public transportation, and getting pickpocketed. Now, when I travel, I'm more concerned about some kind of electronic theft or skimming my wallet. It seems like as the more I talk, the more I become more of a victim than I should. But I've had my wallet skimmed in the Atlanta airport, where they were able to use an electronic device to steal my credit card. And then when I landed in St. Louis, I had nothing. They turned off my credit card after they used it 4 or 5 times. My credit card company did. And then I was left without the ability to rent a car. So it's just one of those things you got to be careful of. As far as ATM safety, just common sense. Whether you're here in Cobb County or somewhere else, be careful when you do that. It's kind of a shame you got to turn your back in that situation. I just wouldn't recommend anyone using an ATM, especially at night, and definitely not in a remote area. That goes back to the common sense factor. Next slide. Again, you're traveling alone. We've all done it. I remember my first time I went to China, and China is a relatively, as far as theft, a relatively, safe country. You don't have a lot of theft and that kind of thing. But I went off the beaten path once by myself, and I was obviously a stranger, and you're just kind of setting yourself up for failure there. As far as the lack of confidence, I don't necessarily see a lack of confidence when people are traveling internationally. I think when people are traveling internationally, they seem to be pretty happy and they fit in the environment. I see it more lack of confidence when they use public transportation. right here in the city. But it's obvious if you look like a victim, you're more likely to be picked out as a victim. The displays of wealth, it's just common sense, especially in an international country that doesn't display a lot of jewelry, so expensive clothes maybe, and even for some of the women traveling with very expensive handbags. I think it just says, look at me, I have money, and come on over here and take it. You can look at those locations. I just traveled 2 weekends ago, and I just couldn't wait because I heard all the airports were completely empty, and that was completely false. The airport was jam-packed for 4th of July, and people were crowding. There was no distance, distancing between people. So I think the airport's still one to be careful of. Touristy attraction and crowded venues, hopefully we're seeing less of that. But it's a good time to be, especially if you seem like you're out of place, to be a victim. This is Erin's favorite slide, and I always let her talk about this so I don't say anything stupid and get in trouble. So Erin?
Sure. So as we sort of touched on a little bit earlier, unfortunately, there is a higher prevalence for people to be targeted based on their gender or their identity. So it is important to know, what the protections are in the location that you're going to. So again, this goes back to the importance of research, knowing what those cultural norms are, what the societal expectations and societally acceptable behaviors are in your location, as well as really whether or not you can trust your local authorities, and whether if you find yourself as a victim of a crime, you really should be reporting that. So making sure that if you have any questions about that, please reach out to the local embassy or consulate if you are in an unfortunate situation where you are a victim of some sort of targeting or harassment or assault. Again, the OSAC CSRs are going to be good for learning some of those trends before you go. So trying to do that research on the front end. But again, just making sure that even in, different cultures, there are different standards. If we go to a country in Latin America, or, there may be more of a machismo culture. So just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean that you should necessarily just let it slide, right? If you have a problem with it, understand the cultural context, but also know when it crosses a line, and being cognizant of what those personal boundaries are for you. Again, research, you can find out if you're going someplace like Japan. There may be different trains that have, women-only cars on them. So if you are uncomfortable, or if that's something that you do encounter, you can then take the necessary steps to, travel on those trains. So I just wanted to make sure that we did touch on that, and make sure that people know that, doing your research on the front end is going to be very important to knowing how to keep yourself safe when you are abroad.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd throw in is it would be a great debate if we wanted to debate it later, if we had a more interactive ability to do so. But in certain countries, I just think you're never going to fit in. What is the saying? Do as the Romans do. There's a time to argue, and there's a time to debate, and there's definitely most of the time to stand up for your own individual rights. But in certain countries, I think it would be more important from a safety and security perspective to fit in. If I were in Saudi Arabia and I didn't have covering on in the right place, and I wanted to stand up for my own rights, if I were talking to my own daughter, I would tell her this is not the time to argue about your individual rights. I was in a very remote place outside of Kuwait when one of the Islam prayers, it was time and the saying, and I was made in this real small, poor town to be known that I wasn't overly welcome there. And to me, that was my bad. I shouldn't have been there in the first place when that was going to come up. The best thing for me to do at that time was to walk away and, accept and acknowledge what their culture was doing, and I didn't belong. So that's my 2 cents. As far as terrorism, yeah, if the State Department says there's a concern, take it. They say don't go there, don't go there. It's not always about terrorism. It could be about tsunami warning or whatever. Like I said, don't be a naysayer, and be quick to adhere to those and follow the instructions. We talked about what's normal, not normal. It goes back to doing your homework. I remember someone told me a long time ago, when you travel abroad, sometimes if you have the opportunity and ask someone who's been there a lot, what's normal, what's not normal, what to expect, where to avoid. The airline attendants, that person's probably been there a gazillion times now. That person may be tired of the same questions, but why not try? Read the local English newspaper of that country before you go and see what's going on. The one about, it may be a stereotype. Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me never to say this again, but it seems like the Europeans, especially in France, are on strike all the time. If I'm traveling to France and in the middle of whether it's a transportation strike or a garbage strike, I'd like to know that. I'd like to know where the hot spots are, and I'd probably like to avoid that area. Again, don't discount your instincts. Everyone does. And we just got to change that behavior. And we see it or feel it, and act on it. And my big advice all the time is, a lot of time, is just walk away if something's not normal, or run if it's really abnormal. We talk about it. It's kind of the same with terrorism. Don't get involved. Gosh, you hear it on international news once or twice a year where an American citizen abroad, whether it's part of a international abroad or it's just someone visiting a different country, gets caught up in their political situation. Of course, we know what happened in North Korea with the young man who ended up being held captive and dying over there as soon as he comes back. And it's just basically better to stay out of that. And it doesn't always have to be, a big political concern. I've shared before that I got involved in watching two German states after a soccer match or a football match. They were very unhappy with something that happened during that football match, and they clashed afterwards. And that was 25 years ago, and Andy thought it was pretty cool until it got really violent. And not only do you get violent and you find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time, but when the police arrived, their police, they didn't care who you were. And my lesson learned was walk away, don't get involved, because I sure don't know how I would have dealt with being in a German police custody. I had no idea what to do. So stay out of it. It's the best thing to do. If you want more training, before you go, if you really get crazy, you can do that. I don't know how much it costs. Aaron said she'd pay for it. I do, various martial arts, and I'm still the same way. Whatever they want, here it is, unless they try to hurt me, and then I would fight back. So there's all kind of training. KSU, we're probably not going to be doing it for a while. We have the rape aggressive defense training called RAD that you could take, and it's not like martial arts. It's more here's how you can fight back to get out of a bad situation and then get out of that area. So there's all kind of opportunities to do anything like that here right on campus. Next slide. Some common sense. I don't know if anyone hitchhikes anymore. I haven't ever hitchhiked in my life. I think that was maybe a 60s thing. I was a kid in the 60s. I never hitchhiked. Carry only what you need. I don't think this is an international travel as much as, again, I think everyone who travels should spend a couple days on MARTA and see all the things you shouldn't do. To see people get off the airplane carrying 3 or 4 bags, it just shows you that I don't belong here, and here's how you can come over and rob me. The same way, whether you're looking at a map in public, You wear your name tag after the conference to show everyone I'm a tourist, and I'll probably have $35 in cash and some other things. There's just common sense. You can look all this up. Keeping your stuff at all the time, it just makes sense. We talked about staying away from protest groups. Um, the luggage is kind of a no-brainer. You can't go to the airport without hearing the airport tell you to stay with your luggage, although a lot of people don't. And keep anything away that suggests that you may be wealthy would be smart to leave at home. So never accept a drink from a stranger. That doesn't have to be in an international place. That should be just about anywhere you go is now. Next slide. The first one seems kind of humorous at first, but if someone's unusually attracted to you, that should be a red flag for one reason or the other. Again, I would suggest that that's not the time, especially if there's alcohol involved. The real security threats, the bombing and the multi-attack that happened, 3 or 4 years ago in France. If you watch the people again, when they first bomb went off and the guy couldn't get into the stadium, a lot of people just didn't think it was happening. Treat everything if it's for real, and again, walk away of that area. The hot spots, we covered that. We covered travel light. There's no reason to be burdened down with a bunch of luggage or a lot of stuff when you can. The opening map, that's sometimes it's hard to avoid that. When I went to New York City the first time, I had to use a map when I walked, but I hated doing it. And the other thing, if it's too good to be true, don't trust it. It's not true. And that's the same with when, how many times do I get a call about the extended warranty on my car each week? It's too good to be true. Just, leave it alone. And same way with your traveling. If someone wants to help you with your luggage because they're just a really nice person, no, they're going to take your luggage. Next slide. We talked about that again, the OSAC that Aaron talked about. I get those every morning. I get them so much sometimes I have to force myself to read them. But you can also review the State Department, the CIA fact book, especially if you're going to somewhere maybe a little bit out of the norm. It's not a bad idea to look at. I know you covered in 2 classes ago about any kind of health travel visit. I think is imperative. They've got it down so good now that when I went the second time to China, because I went to a different place in China that was off the beaten path, they were able to draw a map of my travel and tell me what infectious diseases were of concern in that area. And that was pretty cool. I learned how to spell pronounce Japanese encephalitis during that visit. And I also remembered it wasn't covered with my insurance. That's a different story. Know where to get help if you need it for the embassy or your consulate offices. Before you get there, in case you lose your passport or you become a victim of crime. Next slide, please. I think Aaron covered all those already, but the main thing that if you call back to Kennesaw State University, just make it absolutely clear that you are a KSU, especially when you're traveling abroad or in a program through our international office, that you are a student, and let them know what you're asking them, which most of the time is you're asking them to call Erin or someone in her office. But remember, if it's whatever time, it's drastically different our time. And if you just say I'm a KSU employee or a student, you have to spell it out for them sometime. I don't know, Erin, if you want to say anything else about that.
Yes, absolutely. So just, yes, make sure that, again, you are identifying yourself. That is the key takeaway from this. If you call that KSU police line, that you're identifying yourself as a student or faculty traveling abroad, so that they can then activate the call trees, that they can get you connected with the appropriate person right away. And then, of course, for those of you who are not traveling with KSU or traveling on your personal time, again, American Citizen Services with the consulate or embassy is going to be your go-to for any major incidents, as well as you want to make sure that you have your own insurance information accessible to you in the event that you do need to seek treatment or that you are in a situation where you do need additional assistance, evacuation, things like that. They can direct you to resources. And then I did want to sort of point out that I think Andy did a great job of clarifying. I may have mixed up a few things or not been clear enough when I said when you report if things that are uncomfortable to you, if you are a victim of sexual harassment or assault, anything of that nature, report here. Report to KSU first, or report to the consulate or embassy. That's who you want to start with. You don't necessarily want to start with your local authorities. That's where you'll get the guidance on whether or not it's safe to do so. So thank you very much for clarifying that, Andy. We do have the BRT, which is the Behavior Response Team. They have an online report form. It is available online to report. Either you can identify yourself or you can report anonymously, as well as you can also email BRT or Global Safety, and that'll come to my office. If you, for whatever reason, aren't able to do a phone call, or if it's not urgent. If it is very time sensitive and you do need to talk to someone immediately, just go straight to that 24/7 number. Again, if you do end up reporting to the police, make sure first of all it is safe for you to do so, and then you always want to obtain a copy of the police report for your records. In the event that there is a larger incident, a security incident, make sure that you are following the guidance of the local authorities. They should be telling you whether it is advisable to shelter in place, which now everyone seems to know what that means, which is great. So stay in a location temporarily or long term, or they may tell you to evacuate the area. So keeping in touch with the local news outlets, you can follow on Twitter. If you go to the embassy or consulate near you, they should have a Twitter account. You can subscribe to their feed. Depending on where you're going, if you're going to the UK, you can follow the Metropolitan Police in London to get really timely updates, as well as the step alerts should come through fairly quickly for those larger incidents, and they'll advise you either to avoid certain areas, and if you're in that area, of course, you want to make sure that it's safe for you to move out of that area, or if it's not safe, then you may need to stay for a little bit or see what the local advice is at the time. If it is a longer term shelter in place, just make sure that you have access to food, medication, your important documents. Stay connected as much as possible with anyone you're traveling with or anyone back home so that you can give them updates. They're not sitting there worried about you. And then if you do need to seek treatment, definitely don't defer that care. Go seek treatment, but make sure that you are going to a facility that is secure, that's also not in the middle of a security perimeter, or is otherwise a decent option for you based on the situation. If you are in a situation where you find yourself detained or arrested while you are abroad, it is important to know what the university and what the government can in fact do for you and what it cannot do for you. So just know that U.S. consular officials, they're great at providing information to you, resources, legal resources. If you have supplemental international insurance, you may have a initial consultation call that'll connect you to a lawyer. It's not going to give you a full consult, but they will connect you for the initial, connection and then reference. They can provide notification. They can make sure that you are being, treated well. They can advocate for your treatment if you're not being treated well. Again, it's very limited in what they can actually provide. So be aware that they are not the be-all end-all. So make sure you are following the local laws and know that they're not going to post bail to get you out of jail. And with that, Andy, did you have any final thoughts or anything you would like to add?
No, I think you covered it. The only thing I always remind people traveling, if you have to deal with the police, remember you probably don't have the same rights that you have internationally as you do here. And just take that for what it's worth to keep you out of trouble.
Okay, well, thank you again, Aaron and Andy, for sharing this valuable information. And again, for those of you who are joining us, this will be made available and you can get to this recording on our website, which is what I am posting right here in the chat. So if you go to this link, you'll be able to find this session within the next week or so. And with that, let's move into the Q&A session. And I have the chat pulled up. So if any of you have any questions or needed more clarification on one of the points that Aaron or Andy touched on, you can go ahead and put them in the chat below. I'll give it about maybe a minute or so. And if no questions come in, and then we can go ahead and wrap up.
Working on a couple of requisitions that came in. Are we teamsing or are we just?
Oh, we have a question. Should you need to contact the police overseas, would you recommend contacting the consulate first?
I would say that that's definitely going to be situationally dependent. If it's something like you lost your passport, you probably would go ahead and contact the police. You don't necessarily need to go through the process of getting in touch with the consulate or embassy. If you are in a location, as Andy mentioned, the Middle East, you may want to take that additional step. And even some places like Japan, I pick on Japan a lot because we tend to think it's very safe. But recently we've seen the Department of State has advised that anyone who's traveling on some of the trains and experiences any sort of harassment and decides to be vocal about it, you know, maybe they call it chikan, so someone maybe touches them inappropriately, they decide to make a scene, they call the police. The police have actually been frequently they've found the foreigner to be the one who started it. They would find that person to be basically the perpetrator, and they give them a fine. So unless you're very comfortable with the cultural environment, the society that you're going to be in, and you know what the expectations are, you may just want to sort of get a second opinion on whether or not you should go to the police. It doesn't hurt to ask someone first and say, hey, this happened. Is it okay for me to go to the police? If it's, you know, a huge crime situation, you know, if it's definitely an emergency situation, if you know, you need to get the police involved, or the police are going to be arriving on the scene. Let's say there is an accident, someone is a pedestrian, they're hit by a car, right? You know, just make sure that you're also touching base with someone back home, or touching base just so that in case there are any of these questions, if there's any language barriers, anything like that, you have someone who's kind of aware of the situation, who can help you, advise you, advocate for you. And definitely do not sign anything without getting a second opinion from a lawyer whenever possible. So that's just, I would recommend, if you have any questions, if there's any concern, ask someone.
Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, then we can go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all again for joining us this afternoon. As a quick reminder, our next session and also our last session will be July 27th, and we'll be discussing data security abroad. So a little bit of cybersecurity for us. And if you're looking for more resources, you can go to our website, which the link is in the chat box, or you can also email us at globalsafety@kennesaw.edu. And that concludes this session, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye.